Continuing now with a special Easter show for O'Connor tonight. And again, happy Easter. Hope you had a great day yesterday. We're speaking with Andrew Klavan. Of course, he's the host of the Andrew Klavan Show, must-listen podcast from our friends at the Daily Wire. In our first segment, we talk about literature. In our second segment, we talk about Christianity. How about we merge the two? This book, The Truth and Beauty, great title. Subtitle, little wordy. How the lives and works of England's greatest poets point the way to a deeper understanding of the words of Jesus. Andrew Klavan, the stuff that you lay out here in this book was probably part of the basic syllabus and learning curriculum in most of our colleges and universities right up until about 30 years ago. Now, dare I say, probably isn't touched anywhere.
That's right. That's why I wrote the book for people who don't read poetry. Some people are put off. They think, oh, I don't know anything about poetry. But that's who it's written for, because this was a period, it was a key period in Western history when people started to realize that, as Nietzsche would later put it, God is dead, that they had lost their Christian faith, they had lost their Catholic faith first, and then these are the intellectuals, the thinkers in the society, and then they had really started to lose their Christian faith. And it was answered in two specific ways, one in England and one in Germany. In Germany, it was answered by the philosophers, but in England, it was answered by the poets. And what they started to do was try to rebuild the world they understood, which was a Christian world, without reference to Christ. And so what they did, without meaning to, a lot of them, some of them meant to, but most of them didn't, without meaning to, they built a road back from unbelief to belief. And so it's not really about poetry so much as it's about what it is that we lose when we lose our faith, and how the poets wrote about that in their time. They all understood it. Shakespeare understood it. Milton understood it. And these poets, who are the Romantic poets and some of the greatest writers of all time, they understood it, and they all had different ways and different angles from which they approached it. And so what I hope the book does, and what people have told me, I have to tell you, Larry, when I wrote this book, I thought I was going to self-publish it. Because I thought, who's going to get this? I sent it to the one editor literally on earth I thought might look at it. He bought it. He told me it's not going to sell, but I believe in it, so I'm going to publish it. It became a USA Today bestseller. It's still selling. People are telling me that it really transforms the way they approach their faith. And so it's been an incredibly gratifying experience. But it's just that it was literature in some ways that brought me to faith, and it's literature in which I see the rebuilding of faith after faith fell in the age of science and the age of philosophy. And so that's kind of what it's trying to get at. It's trying to get at that thing that only poetry can touch, which is the human heart. It doesn't philosophy will not take you there. It will take you some places, but to get across that river, you need to deal with the inner man. And it's faith and poetry and art that really reaches the inner man. And that's why I chose to look at the poets and then look back at the Gospels.
Which, by the way, if you look at the church and the way that it grew and expanded, and even before the Reformation, if you look at the Western Church and the Eastern Church, both have these outlets of expressing faith and praying through art. In the East, it's through iconography and the beautiful artwork in the Orthodox churches, and in the West, it was through the sculptures and the paintings, and of course, yes, through literature. There's got to be something there that right. The Holy Spirit is operating in that way, right?
Beauty, when Keats said that beauty is truth and truth beauty, he wasn't referring to prettiness. He wasn't referring to things that you find pretty or I find pretty. He was talking about that kind of mystic connection between what a human being sees and what is reality. There's no place in life where we see reality directly. It never happens. We never see reality directly. We see it as a kind of collaboration between what's out there, the unknown, and what we experience in our hearts. But you can get it wrong. You can have delusions. You can you can think you're in love and not be in love. You can think that holding slaves is okay and it's not okay. And so that journey to try and connect your inner world with that inner world that's out there is the journey of faith. And what Coleridge, the great poet and theologian Coleridge, said was that Jesus is the model for doing that. He is the representative of what a man sees when he sees life correctly. And that's why he is centered in love, which is that beautiful connection that we make to the outer world and to other people, that reminds us that the inner life is real and the inner life of other people is real as well.
So you lay out in The Truth and Beauty how these English poets can point our way to the inspiring words of Jesus and the truth of the gospel. Gospel, of course, written in Greek in the first place, one of the greatest works of literature of all time, I think maybe you would disagree, would be the King James translation.
Unbelievably great.
Of those Greek texts. How did you go about sort of unpacking all of that in terms of, you've got original language in Greek, then you've got the translation, then you've got the poets in their English work. And by the way, is this something unique to the English language? Do other cultures and other languages have this deep literary exploration of the scriptures as well?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I taught myself Greek. I taught myself Koine Greek so I could read them.
Of course you did, because you're Andrew freaking Klavan.
I was not very good at it, but I have to say my son, who is an actual linguist, I would call him up on the phone and say, "Am I getting this right?" And language is very important. As my son Spencer Klavan, no relation, likes to point out, is that language picks out. Reality is a continuum, but language picks out certain meanings of things. And in different languages, you get different meanings. You don't hit exactly the same space. So the more you know, the more languages you know, the more you get that whole picture. But the King James Bible, which my son assures me is one of the great translations, not just gorgeous, it's also very accurate, which is really hard to do, make it both beautiful and accurate. But it also became part of the way we think. I mean, there must be a million phrases that are just part of what people say every day. And one of the problems with losing your faith, or not at least knowing about the Christian faith, is that it shapes you whether you know it or not. It shapes you whether you're the deepest atheist in the world or not. If you are a Westerner, if you live in the West, if you've come to the West, if you enjoy it or don't enjoy it here in the West, you are in some sense a Christian. The things you think are right and wrong are Christian things. And so you might as well know where you come from, so you have some control over it. And when people tell you that it's all a fraud, you get to say, well, okay, if it's all fraud, then how do you explain this? How do you explain that?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, I keep hearing atheists tell me, for instance, that all cultures are equal because there's no such thing as objective morality. And therefore, it's wrong to disrespect other cultures. And I think, well, if there's no such thing as objective morality, why is it wrong to do anything? Why is it wrong to disrespect them? The whole idea that you should respect them is a Christian idea. It is not an idea that comes naturally to people who have been warring with other cultures all through history. Yeah. And so all of these things are so embedded in our lives, in our language, and in our thought that I thought by teaching myself Greek, by going back to these books in a new way, in a fresh way, I could see them in a new way, which I think is important because even though Christ remains the same, we don't. We change, our electronics change, our technology changes, our experience of the world changes. And so it's good to hear Christ in a new way, even if you're hearing the same thing.
It's such a smart observation about how the King James translation affects our everyday vocabulary. I mean, do unto others. When does anyone ever use the word unto?
You're right.
Except that's the only time, but that's it, right? Real fast, because I want to bring it back to our education system in America today. I actually believe we should have a very strong and robust public education system, but back in the way that it was originally conceived. Right. I think of the film Dead Poets Society, which sort of is a reflection of this book you've written. And when you watch it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is like, who can imagine schools like this? That was set in 1960, I think, or maybe 1959. That wasn't that long ago, Klavan.
Yeah, and it's been purposeful. They mean to gut the curriculum of Western wisdom because they think that believing in the West is somehow bigoted and wrong. But in fact, in my personal opinion, the culture of Europe from 1500 to 1915 is the high watermark so far of human endeavor. It didn't happen because people had white skin. It didn't, not everybody did have white skin. It didn't happen for racial reasons because there were a million races mixed in. I think that's part of what made it so great. But it did happen, and I think that we shouldn't ignore it. There's no other culture that has produced Mozart, Michelangelo, Shakespeare, the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration, all of those things grow out of Western culture, and they should be preserved and cherished. And we should remember what it is, where it is, what it is we love about them, because we wouldn't be standing here if we hadn't walked on that road. And the people who take that road away think that they're going to reinvent the world anew. Every time anyone has ever reinvented the world anew, they ended up with the guillotine. And so when I hear people say, when I hear woke people say, wow, we've suddenly realized life is unjust, as if no one has ever realized that before, and we're going to make it just. I always think you're going to need a bigger guillotine before you make the world just. It's not going to be just. It's just going to be worse if you don't follow the path we're on.
Don't give them ideas. They're constructing that giant guillotine as we speak. All right, so start your own Dead Poets Society in your home with Andrew Klavan's The Truth and Beauty, and give it to whatever child or grandchild is about to go to college. We've got more with Andrew Klavan in a moment.